Hey, guess I wanted to talk a little bit about nihilism to jump into the discussion of uh, an opposition to narrative mythology relative to nihilism. This has been on my mind recently, and then there's two videos, Anton, Wise Monkey. It seems like it's somewhat topical going around. So, and I had made a video to Thou Art That, and I referenced symbolism, and Greytex mentioned something about turning uh, molehills into triangles, or triangles into molehills. And what I wanted to discuss once again, with regards to Wise Monkey had mentioned that a complex mind or a sophisticated mind might require a very voluminous narrative in order to entertain itself, or in order to reach the depths of meaning. And I was trying to think about what would be the difference, because Anton had kicked into a mythological narrative to justify the metaphor, the isness statement about life. And I had mentioned to Thou Art That where people place their is statements in language, where the simile, where the metaphor begins, isn't the problem. It's the direction of it's where they take us after they establish that metaphor. So what I was doing is I was thinking, what is the opposite of a robust, voluminous narrative? Like, can we reduce it to something that's more like a gossamer, a thin, sinewy cobweb? And I thought, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to speak not voluptuousness of narrative. I want to speak of a line, just a simple line, like a spider's web that moves through space. Because if we can reduce the narrative and oppose it, right? If we can declense against the meaning and find what might be looked at as an kind of like a compass-based orientation of where the narrative takes us, to actually have a landscape in order to look at how a narrative is put together. This is based on the idea of running with the verbose operation as opposed to the nounous operation. As far as narrative or metaphor might be concerned, kind of like I've juggled in my past, and there's different ways to throw balls up in the air and catch them as they come down. And there's different directions and different patterns that can be built. And then I was thinking about playing drums, and how I play drums, and how you're kind of working in a space and you're moving your hands around and about this trap set, in order to tap things in rhyme. And the direction in which your body moves is what's important, as far as completing kind of an interaction with the ambient music of the other instrumentalists that are playing in the band. Now, the opposite of a robust narrative, being like a sinewy cobweb or just like a line in space, once again brings me to the idea of sacred geometry. The idea of nihilism as a declension, or moving unintuitively against inherited authorial structures, claims, must-be's, previous is statements build off of metaphors, right? These are inherited authorial power structure. So one could say, you know, A is to be as C is to be as D is to be, and B might be like the top of a tent. It might look like a geometric pyramid upward, where another person, you know, as a declension, or to make metaphor to that pyramid, those lines between A is to B as being one sinewy line, right, might be to say A, C, and D are people, and the authorial power structure is B, and so they're all doing it, so we should do it. They're all doing it, so I should do it. Now, I'll pose this to kind of a nihilistic declension, right, which I believe is just part of a patterning. It's to say A is to minus Y, as B is to minus Y, as C is to minus Y, and consider minus Y like an inverted triangle, an inverted pyramid. And this might be something like, well, they all see it this way, therefore I'm not going to see it that way, right? So on one end, we might say that like Anton and in Mentam are counter opposites, where Anton is imbuing gift and kind of an upward concurrence with inherited authorial structures in kind of a hierarchy, where Gary is kind of functioning as the negation property. And I think everybody has different patternings, and this is what I mean by where do we accept, what demarcation lines, what narratives are we going to accept, what metaphors are we going to nod with one another and agree upon, right? This just seems like it's very, very important. And so my point in bringing this up is, once we have this disagreement, kind of like Derrida will say that writing came before speech. Writing came before speech. Now this runs counterintuitive to what we would say is not only a chronological history showing alphabetacy occurring at a particular moment in time, but it's based on the idea of being more ocularly or retinal-centric as opposed to eardrum-centric. The auditory field takes second place to a baby's watching its parents' gestural patternings. It's their positioning, like they're playing drums with their hands, the angle of the movement, how they blink, how they cover their eyes, the peekaboo game, right? And the combination with the auditory field. So Derrida suggests that writing actually came before this. And not only does he mention it in terms of like pictographs, that animals move in space and they observe each other moving in space. So in a history, but more or less he's also speaking more like we are writing in a codicy of the inner subjective. Like an inner subjective consensus takes community of agreement. That means like if you speak a language and you understand what's being said, you've already written it in your mind. You've already solved a certain codic, right? But since it's rudimentary, being our native tongue, right? Whoever's native tongue is, any learning of a foreign language would be like a rediscovering a codic. So he's suggesting that we're just writing on a mental palette that we all share. And so he makes a metaphor in that regard. Now, the reason I mention that is because there is a way to take the negative, kind of the downward distillation that Gary, in his quad of what the basics of humanity is, and the insistence and regurgitatedness of that, and say, yes, it is ground, right? That somebody has come to a truism about humanity that others simply could not disagree with. Well, my approach is that every single concept can be disagreed with. Now, one could say, well, does that include your concept? Therefore, you know, if everything can be disagreed with, then my concept that everything can be disagreed with is disagreed with. But I'm not trying to talk about any logical trappings here. I'm simply talking about the basis of accepting initial initial claims and moving away from those. So what I'm suggesting is that nihilism is simply almost a cohesive term for moving away from that which is accepted, that which is historically accepted. Now, I think if people move against their spatial, temporal, ecstatic, awake sense, if they throw themselves away from declaring colors that they see in their field, of declaring that their feet are further from their eyes than their hands, if they deny these things and move against lex naturalis, what we have is we have a moving pattern of the hierarchy being below the declension pyramid, and then we get a parabola. Not just a parabola, but we get the hyperbola. This moves into what's referenced in sacred signs as a Merkaba. Now the Merkaba is a pyramid upward and a pyramid downward that are meshed together, and this is considered sacred. This one could write another narrative in terms of the spirit and one's light binding together. Now, I think besides just narratives and stories that happen through different religious histories, if we look at Kabbalistic and occult, if we look at these histories, we'll find symbolism, and I like to reference symbolic cause. And when I say symbolic cause, I mean how these symbols are relative to one chakra system, how one engages their spatial temporal interactions, how one's digestive system is considered more animalistic, where to follow a hierarchy might be akin to the best thoughts one's mind could run with. But basically, when the pyramids inverted mesh together, it's considered a spiritual highlight. Now, the hyperbolas mesh generate a spiral geometrically, and the spiral itself is symbolic. Now, these spirals and the occult symbology also have pentagrams and hexagrams, and the tree of life, the Kabbalic tree of life, has a hexagram. You move down, you have a pentagram, and then you have a triangle at the bottom, or a line throughout this tree, which is indicating how one not only moves through within their system, but how one relates to the cosmos at large in terms of not only coincidence, but what I would say is a connection with something other that's interdimensional. And that might be a stretch, right, to go that far. But when we think about orientation of a star on a flag, and how if you rotate the star upside down and you get a pentagram, that's all of a sudden the Semitic goat, Baphomet. It's ominously dark, and it's considered more evil or inverted. Now, Semitic just means to stop, to go static. Now, if you take your static waking life, the dynamicness of it, and you make it all static, such that the spatio-temporal life that you live in is also denied in a type of nihilism, you reach a certain abyss. Now, I think nihilism is a part of natural psychological processes, and as soon as people engage these symbols and the symbolism, they can take their the narrative stories and apply them, such as Rabbit 2011, the year of the rabbit, 2012, the year of the dragon and the snake's relationship to the mother goddess and to the fall.